any other source.
The waiting Confederates.
Tonight, ABC is proud to present the dramatic conclusion of Lincoln.
25 years ago, I was a hired laborer, just like any poor man's son.
Hollywood turns out to tell this great American story with Richard Dreyfuss.
Elected 16th President of the United States, his task was to arm Americans against Americans.
Robbie Benson.
Had not enough been endured.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
The Confederate cause was doomed.
Jill Clayburgh.
Mr. Lincoln put his arms around me, and we both wept.
James Earl Jones.
Would-be assassins had openly vowed they would not let Lincoln live into a second term.
Eli Wallach.
I almost begged him to remain in the executive mansion and not to go to the theater.
Glenn Close.
Have I given my husband to die?
Jason Robards.
I claim not to have controlled events, but confess plainly that events have controlled me.
The conclusion of Lincoln, next. Tonight's presentation brought to you by Lincoln Mercury and the complete line of 1993 Lincoln and Mercury automobiles. And the card, the American Express card. Don't leave home without it.
In part one, his story began in a backwoods cabin of a poor American family.
Abe was right out in the woods about as soon as he was weaned.
He raised himself to be a lawyer and was chosen to lead a country divided by one burning issue.
If you think that the Negro ought to be on a social equality with your wives and daughters, then support Mr. Lincoln.
Elected 16th President of the United States, his task was to arm Americans against Americans.
It is impossible to portray in any adequate words the strain and the anguish he endured during those early months of war.
Nearly crushed by the death of a son, his marriage to socialite Mary Todd increasingly strained, Lincoln threw himself into the running of the war and spoke the words at Gettysburg that would change America forever.
7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Now, the dramatic story continues. The triumph and the tragedy of the man at the center of this nation's history. A man who stepped forth out of the wilderness. Abraham Lincoln.
For heaven's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. How some have been deposed, some slain in war, some haunted by the ghosts they have deposed. All murdered.
Quoting Shakespeare late into the night, spinning stories, watching stars from the nearby Naval Observatory. These were some of the diversions that took Lincoln's mind off the haunting concern of not yet having found the right general for his armies. Since the very beginning, Lincoln had combed through the roster of military men, searching for the right leader. General Scott, old and sick. General McClellan, uncooperative and slow. General Halleck, timid and testy. Lincoln was astonished at Halleck's breakdown after the Battle of Second Manassas.
Nerve and pluck all gone. A little more sense than a first-rate clerk.
For most of 1862 and 1863, Lincoln himself served as general-in-chief, as one after another his generals failed him. Inept Burnside at Fredericksburg, bragging overconfident Hooker at Chancellorsville, and then nervous old snapping turtle Meade, as Lincoln called him, who had failed to follow up his Gettysburg victory with the death blow to the Confederacy. Where to turn? Finally, from out of the ranks, A new Western star had begun to rise. A taciturn, go-it-his-own-way fighting man named Ulysses S. Grant. He was Lincoln's type of man. Log cabin raised, unassuming, careless in dress, unconcerned with protocol. Though merely an average student at West Point, once a leather salesman, a heavy drinker, he had not earned his nickname, Unconditional Surrender Grant, for nothing.
Find me the name of his brand, and I'll send some of it to my other general. I can't spare this man. He fights.
On the day after the Battle of Gettysburg, Grant had won the most important victory of the war in a Mississippi River town called Vicksburg. What followed was a string of Union triumphs in the West at places like Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge. The Confederacy, said Lincoln, was now like an animal with a thorn in its vitals. Within weeks, Mary Lincoln's much younger half-sister, Emily Todd Helm, arrived in Washington. The war had torn the Todd family of Kentucky apart. In September, Emily's husband, Ben Hardin Helm, a Confederate general, had been killed at Chickamauga.
Mr. Lincoln and my sister met me with the warmest affection. We were all too grief-stricken at first for speech. I have lost my husband. They have lost their fine little son, Willie. And the future, alas, the future seems empty of everything but despair.
You know, little sister, I tried to have Ben come with me. I hope you do not feel I am to blame for all this sorrow.
While my husband loved him and had been deeply grateful to him for his generous offer to make him an officer in the Federal Army, he had to follow his conscience and side with his own people. Mr. Lincoln put his arms around me, and we both wept. After I'd said goodnight and had gone to my room last night, there was a gentle knock at the door, and Sister Mary's voice. "Emily, may I come in?" She was smiling, and her eyes were wide and shining. It's unnatural and abnormal. It frightens me.
It was becoming clear that under the stress of war and personal loss, Mary's mental health was breaking down. She now admitted that she had lately been seeing the ghost of her son, Willie.
I want to tell you, Emily, if Willie did not come to comfort me, I would still be drowned in tears. He lives, Emily. He comes to me every night and stands at the foot of my bed with the same sweet, adorable smile he has always had. You cannot dream of the comfort this gives me.
Later, she sent for me to come and see some friend who wished especially to see me. It was General Sickles, and he said to the president in a loud, dictatorial voice, slapping the table with his hand, "You should not have that rebel in your house."
Excuse me, General Sickles. My wife and I are in the habit of choosing our own guests. We do not need from our friends either advice or assistance in the matter.
Although Brother Lincoln and Sister Mary have urged me to stay longer, I feel that my being here is more or less an embarrassment to all of us. And I'm longing for Kentucky and Mother.
Over the course of the war, Lincoln exercised his privilege to pardon deserters and war offenders more and more frequently. With Washington prisons filled to capacity with military prisoners, Lincoln matched his toughness as commander-in-chief with an almost legendary leniency. In a single stroke of the pen, Lincoln once commuted 62 death sentences. Lincoln's friend Leonard Swett was once bluntly brushed aside as Friday approached. Black Friday, Lincoln called it.
Get out of the way, Swett. Tomorrow is Butcher Day, and I must go through these papers and see if I cannot find some excuse to let these poor men off. I don't think shooting will do this one any good. I say let him go.
What a man he is. occupied all day with matters of vast moment, deeply anxious about the fate of the greatest army of the world, he yet has such a wealth of simple good fellowship. At Gardner's gallery, we had a great many pictures taken. Some of the president, the best I have seen. Nico and I immortalized ourselves by having ourselves done in group with the press.
Cameras are painfully truthful. That cameraman seemed anxious about the picture. But boys, I didn't know what might happen to the camera.
On February 9th, Lincoln visited Brady's Washington Gallery for pictures. It was an historic day. The images that would later be used on the Lincoln penny and the $5 bill, both were taken this day. And so was the picture of the president with Tad that made the front pages.
Mr. Lincoln kept Tad with him almost constantly. I'm sure the times when he was really resting were when he was galloping around with Tad on his great shoulders.
If you see the president, tell him from me that whatever happens, there will be no turning back.
Back on the front, Grant marched his army into the impenetrable forests and swamplands of inland Virginia, where Lee was known to be waiting. It became known as the Wilderness Campaign.
Grant has gone into the wilderness, crawled in, drawn up the ladder, and pulled in the hole after him.
Over the next 7 days, Grant lost 26,000 men, killed or wounded. It was the worst week's toll of the war. Still, he pushed forward. Traveling with the Army of the Potomac led by George Meade, Lieutenant General Grant made the major tactical decisions for the struggle toward Richmond. Pausing for moments between frequent engagements, he studied maps, conferred with Meade, gave orders to his chief of staff, and sent messages through his cipher operator. At every stop, horses were kept at the ready.
How near we have been to this thing before and failed. It is the dogged pertinacity of Grant that wins. Grant, hold on with a bulldog grip and chew and choke as much as possible.
General Sherman called the period the supreme moment of Grant's life. In one furious 8 minutes, 12,000 men were killed or wounded. Union losses during just 1 month at places like Spotsylvania and Cold Harbor totaled 55,000, nearly the size of Lee's entire army.
The world has never seen so bloody or so protracted a battle as the one being fought, and I hope never will again.
My God. My God. 20,000 poor souls sent to their final account in one day. I cannot bear it. I cannot bear it. The immense slaughter of our brave men chills and sickens us all. The hospitals are crowded with the thousands of mutilated and dying heroes who have poured out their blood in the Union cause.
During the battles of the Wilderness, Lincoln scarcely slept at all. He paced back and forth, his hands behind, great black rings under his eyes, his head bent forward upon his breast.
the course of the war, captured Southern soldiers suffered in filthy, overcrowded prison camps. But nothing could equal the plight of Union soldiers in Confederate camps. They were kept in conditions of near starvation. To them, death came as a blessed relief. In 1864, Lincoln helped to create a prisoner exchange program and sent Lucius Chittenden of Vermont to inspect the first releasees.
I went to Annapolis and saw in the hospitals all that remained of a party of over 300 enlisted men. They were men no longer. They were skeletons. The rags in which they had arrived 3 days before had been taken from their bodies and burned. They had been robbed of their blankets, clothes, and money, and then left to starve and die.
For the first time, Americans were now being made aware of just how ghastly and inhuman the war was. In addition, following Grant's staggering casualties in the wilderness, Lincoln called for the draft of another 500,000 recruits. It was more than the country could take. Draftees, considering themselves Lincoln's victims, bitterly complained that they were bound to free niggers or die.
A third of each day's mail consisted of piteous pleas for peace, for a termination of the long murder of the Civil War. Had not enough been endured?
Voices from everywhere cried out against the president.
Illinois beast, wet rag, tyrant, timid,
Imbecile.
pitiable, weak, foul-tongued,
Shallow, dazed, and utterly foolish.
Amidst this popular discontent and hostile passion, the nation was compelled to plunge into a political contest.
I confess, I desire to be reelected. God knows I do not want the labor and responsibility of the office for another 4 years. But I honestly believe that I can better serve the nation in its need and peril than any new man could possibly do. I want to finish this job.
With him now was a new running mate, chosen to strengthen the ticket, the popular military governor of Tennessee, Andrew Johnson. By summer's end, Lincoln faced a powerful Democratic opponent, none other than George B. McClellan, the outspoken military leader upon whom the North had once pinned its hopes. Now campaigning against the president, McClellan was telling the country he was willing to end the war through compromise.
August 23rd, 1864. This morning, as for some days past, it seems exceedingly probable that this administration will not be reelected. I'm going to be beaten. And unless some great change takes place, badly beaten.
At first, we were going to use a lot of glamorous professional models to advertise our cars. Then we considered the famous basketball player. What's his name with the shoes? We also looked at expensive special effects, catchy jingles, and snappy slogans. Then we had the big idea. Why not just show all the cars and mention things like smooth ride and fully equipped comfort, and leave the gimmicks to the other guys. Okay, so we used one glamorous professional model. All this and the quality of a Mercury.
Doctor.
Is it right for me?
Habitrol.
It's a nicotine patch.
Habitrol.
For information, call 1-800-685-2000.
You know, Habitrol.
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 Habitrol Nicotine Transdermal System. Available by prescription only.
Thank you, Doctor.
A new kind of softness is about to touch you. Camay Innocent, now with fragrant drops of natural moisturizer, leaving you softer than ever. Tender. Uncover a new you, and be softer too. Camay. A new kind of softness is about to touch you. Camay Flare, now with fragrant drops of natural moisturizer, leaving you softer than ever. Sexy. Uncover a new you, and be softer too. Camay.
Lincoln will continue in a moment.
He's back. The NFC West champion Niners have announced the return to action of Joe Montana. They'll meet Detroit live on the Monday Night Football season finale.
Christmas isn't over yet. Your Central Arkansas Hyundai dealers have extended Christmas. They're making incredible deals. Buy any new Hyundai right now and get $400 cash for gas. Plus, make no payments for 90 days. That's on top of factory rebates up to $750 on 93 models in stock. But you've got to hurry because these deals won't last for long. And they're only available at North Point Hyundai, Hot Springs Hyundai, Pine Bluff Hyundai.
Hardee's new Santa Fe burger. Thick, all-American beef. Onions. Lettuce. Tomatoes. Cheese. And spicy sauce. Got a taste for the Southwest? Then taste Hardee's new Santa Fe burger. But hurry, it won't be around for long. And for a Southwestern-style breakfast, try Hardee's Tortilla Scrambler.
Are you ready for some real fun? Hardee's.
Share the spirit of Arkansas with KATV Channel 7.
The day of the presidential election in November 1864 was dark and rainy. Lincoln took no pains to conceal his anxious interest in the result of the election then going on all over the country.
That night was rainy, steamy, and dark. We splashed through the grounds to the side door of the War Department. As the president entered, they handed him a dispatch claiming 10,000 Union majority in Philadelphia. The president sent over the first fruits to Mrs. Lincoln. He said, "She is more anxious than I."
As the tension of the evening mounted and all eyes focused on the election returns, Lincoln, in need of distraction, pulled out a book of humor and began to read aloud. Enraged by Lincoln's lack of seriousness, Edwin Stanton stormed out of the room.
Damn it to hell. Was there ever such inability to appreciate what is going on? Here is the fate of this whole republic at stake, and here is the man on whom it all depends. Turning aside from this monumental issue to read damn silly trash.
As the evening wore on, everything depended on how the people decided to vote. And vote they did, giving Lincoln a decisive victory.
The election is over, and Abraham Lincoln is re-elected President of the United States. Thank God it is thus, for it's the salvation of the country.
From the hour of Mr. Lincoln's re-election, the Confederate cause was doomed.
But mixed with the night's elation was fear. Would-be assassins had openly vowed they would not let Lincoln live into a second term.
After midnight, we came home. Lamon came to my room, took a glass of whiskey, and then lay down at the president's door with a small arsenal of pistols and Bowie knives around him.
For years, Lincoln had had premonitions of his own assassination. They began when he was first elected 4 years earlier, back in Springfield.
After my election in 1860, I was tired out and went home to rest. Opposite where I lay was a bureau with a swinging glass upon it. I saw myself reflected. My face, I noticed, had two separate and distinct images. One of the faces a little paler, say 5 shades than the other. I got up, and the thing melted away. My wife thought it was a sign that I was to be elected to a second term of office, and that the paleness of one of the faces was an omen that I should not see life through the last term.
Frequent letters were received warning Mr. Lincoln of assassination, but he never gave a second thought to them. The letters, however, sorely troubled his wife. She seemed to read impending danger in every rustling leaf, in every whisper of the wind.
Father, you should not go out alone. You know you are surrounded with danger.
All imagination. What does anyone want to harm me for? Don't worry about me, Mother, as if I were a little child, for no one is going to molest me.
Honorable A. Lincoln, I regret that you do not appreciate what I have repeatedly said to you in regard to the proper police arrangements connected with your household. You are in danger. Tonight, you went unattended to the theater. You ought to know that your life is sought after and will be taken unless you and your friends are cautious. You have many enemies within our lines.
Ever since summer, the actor John Wilkes Booth and his 2 brothers had planned a special New York benefit performance of the play Julius Caesar. On Friday, November 25th, the play was performed at New York's Winter Garden Theater to a packed house. It was proclaimed the greatest theatrical event in New York history. It was John Wilkes Booth's last serious performance. For several months, Booth had been increasingly restless, finding it difficult to pay attention to his acting career. He had never been as accomplished on stage as his famous eccentric father, Junius, or his older brother, Edwin, who early on knew not all was well with John.
Dear Mother is happy with her children about her, thank God. But she still has an absent one, the youngest boy, strange, wild, and ever moving. He causes us all some degree of anxiety.
Much of my life's struggle has been with myself and in overcoming the evils of my untrained disposition.
As a boy, he once systematically exterminated every cat on his family's farm. As an actor, he could be outright violent.
He generally slept smothered in steak or oysters to cure his own bruises. Though an excellent swordsman, in his blind passion, he constantly cut himself. How he threw me about, once even knocked me down.
On several occasions, Booth had already touched the lives of the Lincolns. Tad had seen him act and said, "He makes me thrill." And Booth had presented the president's son with a rose. Another time, Lincoln was at the theater with some of Mary's relatives when the actor stopped near the president's box and shook his finger. Mary's guest turned to the president and said, "Mr. Lincoln, he looks as if he meant that for you."
Well, he does look pretty sharp at me, doesn't he?
Knowing his sympathy for the South, I was very much afraid he might go over the lines, and I begged him not to be so foolish. We have always been fearful of J. Wilkes.
Booth was living at the National Hotel, keeping horses in a stable off F Street behind Ford's Theater. Through his friendship with Edmund Spangler, a theater scene shifter, he had gained access to Ford's Theater night and day by all of its many entrances.
I had begun to think of myself as a coward and to despise myself.
December 1864. The war was now solidly in Northern hands. In Nashville, Tennessee, the Union was now in possession of the great southern fortress, the Capitol building. Off North Carolina, the largest American fleet ever assembled, over 70 vessels strong, positioned itself for a devastating bombardment of the Confederates' last coastal stronghold, Fort Fisher. The noose was tightening.
The war continued. All important lines and positions have been maintained. The most remarkable feature of the year is General Sherman's march of 300 miles directly through the insurgent region. Sherman's campaign will become famous in the annals of war.
I estimate the damage done at $100 million. We have devoured the land. Realize what war is, one should follow our tracks.
No one helped Lincoln escape from the horrors of the war more than Tad. But every time the president looked at his youngest son, he felt anxious. Unlike other children, Tad did not attend school, and with his education sorely neglected, he remained almost completely illiterate. With a special nurse to attend for his basic needs, he could not dress himself until the age of 8. Missing Willie, Tad began to creep into his father's bed more and more often. The child was so vulnerable, so open, so infirm emotionally, so loving, he tore at Lincoln's heart.
When this is over, I tell my boy Tad that we will go back to the farm. When I was happier as a boy when I dug potatoes at 25 cents a day than I am now. I tell him I will buy him a mule and a pony, and he shall have a little garden in a field all his own.
Lincoln's tenderness as a father was very different from the way he had been raised by his own father. Old-fashioned, stubborn, sometimes severe, Thomas Lincoln never received an invitation to Lincoln's wedding, was not ever invited to Springfield, and never once laid eyes on his daughter-in-law Mary or any of his grandchildren. Some of the chill between Lincoln and his father now seemed to repeat itself between the president and his own son, Robert. Away at Harvard during the presidential years, Robert almost never saw the man who sent him money and salutations. Lincoln was embarrassed that Robert was not in uniform, but until now, for Mary's sake, the president himself had blocked Robert's enlistment.
We have lost one son, and his loss is as much as I can bear, without being called upon to make another sacrifice. His services are not required in the field, and the sacrifice would be a needless one. He should stay in college a little longer. An educated man can serve his country with more intelligent purpose than an ignoramus.
But many a poor mother has given up all her sons, and our son is not more dear to us than the sons of other people are to their mothers. The services of every man who loves his country are required in this war. You should take a liberal instead of a selfish view of this question, Mother. Lieutenant General Grant, my son, now in his 22nd year, having graduated at Harvard, wishes to see something of the war before it ends. Could he, without embarrassment to you or detriment to the service, go into your military family with some nominal rank?
I will be most happy to have him in my military family in the manner you proposed.
I cannot bear to have Robert exposed to danger. Grant is a butcher and is not fit to be at the head of an army. He loses 2 men to the enemy's 1. If the war should continue 4 years longer and he should remain in power, he would depopulate the North.
The true test of whether something is really a good idea is whether it sounds simple. You can walk into a store in Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, or here in New York and find the same items in the same area. If you get confused, just ask some child. They'll tell you where it is. Too many companies, in my opinion, look quarter to quarter. 25 years ago, we started with the earliest computers, and today we probably are among the most sophisticated in retailing. Children come along and they say, I gotta have, if I don't get, I will die. Those are our salespeople. Parents who use the card are probably gonna buy more. And grandparents certainly are gonna buy more. I buy the majority of my purchases, frankly, with the American Express card. It's simpler for me, period.
American Express is welcome to Toys R Us and other fun spots.
Compare the new 32-valve, 280 horsepower Lincoln Mark 8 to everything else. Then you'll understand why, instead of introducing it, we decided to launch it. The new Lincoln Mark 8. What a luxury car should be.
Take a tip from Santa and give the Dirt Devil hand vac. Help someone you love clean up this Christmas.
Now for sinus sufferers, the makers of full prescription strength Actifed introduce new Actifed Sinus, daytime, nighttime. The only sinus relief system that makes it simple to treat sinus pain right, day and night. The daytime formula breaks up sinus congestion so you can breathe without making you drowsy. The nighttime formula is maximum strength, so you can rest.
Your sinus is better?
Yeah.
New Actifed Sinus, daytime, nighttime. Treat sinus pain right, day and night.
College football's national championship, New Year's night on ABC.
Under a majestic, newly completed 9 million pound Capitol Dome, the Reverend Henry Highland Garnett became the first of his race ever to speak in the halls of Congress.
Let slavery die. Its death warrant is signed by God and man. Do not commute its sentence. Give it no respite. Let it be ignominiously executed.
The President's Emancipation Proclamation had one fatal flaw. As a War Powers Act, it could not be counted on to survive into peacetime. For that, a constitutional amendment was needed, what Lincoln had come to call a king's cure for all the evils. On January 31st, 1865, the House of Representatives cast its long-awaited vote on the most important legislation in the entire century, the 13th Amendment, outlawing slavery forever.
I congratulate myself, the country, and the whole world
upon this great moral victory.
With slavery abolished and the war almost over, Lincoln's second term approached. For many, the American spirit itself seemed to be summed up in him. Committed to innovation and progress, Lincoln's presidency was filled with firsts. He signed a bill creating the first Congressional Medal of Honor. He was the first president to authorize the Treasury Department to levy an income tax. He was the first president to issue paper money and the first to inscribe U.S. coins with "In God We Trust." He established free mail delivery in 49 cities, made it possible to send money orders through the mails, and he was the first to receive a transcontinental message when the telegraph lines between the Atlantic and the Pacific were finally completed. Lincoln's daily habits were simple, his White House routine peculiarly his own.
The president rose early, as his sleep was light and capricious. His breakfast was an egg and a cup of coffee.
He ate mechanically. I have seen him sit down at the table, and never, unless recalled to his senses, would he think of food. He was a peculiar man.
His size 14 feet gave him trouble.
I shall never get these boots on till I wear them a day or two and stretch them a little.
Sometimes Lincoln decided against wearing boots and throughout the morning kept his slippers on. They made flip-flop sounds on the White House floors.
I like to give my feet a chance to breathe.
A servant tended his hair and beard, tying a napkin around the president's neck and shaking the clippings out of the White House window. He called his hair his bristles, and once, having been handed a delicate comb, asked, "Haven't you anything you comb your horse's mane with?"
I remember very well one incident. I was sent for by the president, who was in his own room. To my great surprise, I saw that he was struggling with a needle and thread. He was sewing a button on his trousers. "All right," he said, looking at me with a twinkle in his eye. "Just wait until I repair damages."
As time wore on, and the war held its terrible course, Lincoln's demeanor and disposition changed, so gradually that it would be impossible to say when the change began. The boisterous laughter became less frequent year by year. He aged with great rapidity.
I'm very unwell. My feet and hands always cold. I suppose I ought to be in bed. Sometimes I think I am the tiredest man on earth.
Lincoln had lost over 20 pounds during his presidency. 4 years earlier, his face was that of a dynamic, eager leader with unbounded energies. Now it had become the face of a tired and tortured, yet kindly and spiritual old man. He had just passed his 56th birthday. By early 1865, John Wilkes Booth had decided to kidnap Lincoln and smuggle him across the Potomac into the hands of waiting Confederates. Booth formed his plot inside a newly opened boarding house. It belonged to Mary Surratt, and here was the nest in which the conspiracy was hatched.
It is to this man the South owes so much misery. For 4 years I have waited, hoped, and prayed for the dark clouds to break. To wait longer would be a crime.
The day of Lincoln's second inauguration was somber and drizzly. Great crowds of men and women streamed around the Capitol building. Precisely on the stroke of 12 appeared Hannibal Hamlin, whose term of office was now expiring. He was arm in arm with Vice President-elect Andrew Johnson, whose face was extraordinarily red. He was evidently intoxicated.
The vice president has humiliated his friends. I said to Stanton, who was on my right, Johnson is either drunk or crazy. Stanton replied, there is evidently something wrong.
With a fresh haircut, the president waited to speak. Hannibal Hamlin was grim-faced, humiliated by Andrew Johnson's lack of dignity. Johnson held his hat in front of his face, while his friend, Senator Doolittle of Wisconsin, waited to take him out and walk him around until sober. On the balustrade above the president, wearing a top hat, loomed John Wilkes Booth. Just below the speaker's stand, 5 suspicious faces later seemed to match those who would be accused of being part of the conspiracy. Lewis Payne, Confederate deserter. George Atzerodt, ferryman for Confederate spies. David Harold, dim-witted drugstore clerk. John Surratt, rebel spy. Edward Spangler, scene shifter at Ford's Theater.
The country was formed for the white, not for the black man. And I, for one, have ever considered slavery one of the greatest blessings that God ever bestowed upon a favored nation. What an excellent chance I had to kill the president if I had wished.
Abraham Lincoln, rising tall and gaunt among the groups about him, stepped forward and read his inaugural address. As he advanced from his seat, a roar of applause shook the air. Just at that moment, the sun, which had been obscured all day, burst forth and flooded the spectacle with light.
4 years ago, all thoughts were anxiously directed to an impending civil war. All dreaded it. All sought to avert it. Both parties deprecated war. But one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive, and the other would accept war rather than let it perish. And the war came. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
For the first time in my life, and I suppose the first time in any colored man's life, I attended the reception of President Lincoln on the evening of the inauguration. As I approached the door, I was seized by 2 policemen and forbidden to enter. I said to them that they were mistaken entirely in what they were doing, that if Mr. Lincoln knew that I was at the door, he would order my admission, and I bolted in by them. In less than half a minute, I was invited into the East Room of the White House. A perfect sea of beauty and elegance. I could not have been more than 10 feet from him when Mr. Lincoln saw me. His countenance lighted up, and he said in a voice which was heard all around, "Here comes my friend Douglas." As I approached him, he reached out his hand and gave me a cordial shake.
Douglas, I saw you in the crowd today listening to my inaugural address. There's no man's opinion that I value more than yours. What do you think of it?
Mr. Lincoln, it was a sacred effort.
Gentlemen, he is not a happy man. This Mercury Villager is outselling our minivan, and as his top design team, we have to do something about it. He wants a minivan with a sliding rear seat and standard anti-lock brakes. He wants a minivan that is fully equipped, comfortable, and drives like a Mercury.
Why doesn't he just get a Villager?
The new front-wheel drive Mercury Villager. All this and the quality of a Mercury.
Mailroom.
Everybody wants a battery that goes the distance, but you never know when they're about to run out of gas. Only Duracell has the Copper Top Battery Tester, so you can be sure your batteries will keep going down the road. You can't top the Copper Top.
Introducing a different air freshener. New Glade Nature's Collection. Give me fresh, give me clean, give me Nature's Collection. Glade's collection of nature's freshest fragrances. In a spray and a carpet deodorizer. It's different, never heavy, always light, to freshen any room. So fresh, so light, give me fruit, give me green, give me Nature's Collection. New Glade Nature's Collection from SC Johnson Wax. Nature's Collection, yeah.
Pain like this could mean you have sensitive teeth. Here's an effective solution. Introducing Aquafresh Sensitive. It targets the cause of the pain. Microscopic holes that let hot and cold shoot straight to the nerve. Aquafresh Sensitive soothes the nerve and helps stop the pain. And with fluoride and that great Aquafresh taste, it can replace your everyday toothpaste, so you may never have sensitive teeth pain again. New Aquafresh Sensitive soothes the nerve, helps stop the pain.
Oh, great. Just what my stomach needs. Here comes my obnoxious boss.
Hi, Daddy.
Oh, boy. Better make it Malox, because extra strength Malox Plus neutralizes more acid than Mylanta. So you better make it Malox.
And now the moment you've been waiting for.
Welcome back.
It's the return of Jack's Place.
Did you miss me?
And your name was?
Jack's Place returns January 12th.
Lincoln will continue in a moment.
Tuesday, between the holidays, would you rather play with bubbles?
I can't take it anymore!
Or oatmeal and prunes?
Good boy, you're gonna love this.
That's Full House. And would you believe Robin's a mechanic?
If you want to take it for a ride, you better punch holes in the bottom and do like the Flintstones.
A holiday hanging with Mr. Cooper.
Wilma!
Tuesday.
Here on ABC.
Mazda's on the move with beautiful new products like the 93626 ES with standard performance features, standard luxury features, and safety features that make it a fantastic value. But for this kind of performance, luxury, and safety, you need to see your Mazda dealer now. Come see why Mazda's on the move, because the 626s are going fast.
At Scriber, Bosch, Cogswell, North Point, Carter, and James Mazda now.
An important bulletin for everyone interested in saving money. Burlington Coat Factory's After Christmas Sale is on now. Tremendous selections of famous name menswear, ladies' sportswear and dresses, kids' clothes, and coats for everyone in the family. Now slashed far below Burlington Coat Factory's everyday low prices. The quality and designer labels Burlington Coat Factory is famous for are now priced even lower. Burlington Coat Factory's After Christmas Sale. Open New Year's Day.
This is KATV, Little Rock, Pine Bluff.
I fancy the Blue Room will look dreary this evening, so if you are disengaged, wander up and see us. I want to become accustomed to vast solitude by degrees.
Over the years, with the president increasingly imprisoned by work, Mary became lonely. At regular evening receptions in the White House Blue Room, she entertained a stream of interesting and controversial men. In 1864 and 1865, one male friend in particular loomed large in her affections, the suave New York politico Abram Wakeman.
My dear Wakeman, I am just recovering from a little tedious indisposition and pour passer le temps, and perhaps to interrupt you in your numerous engagements, I am now writing. I have taken your advice, for I well know how deeply grieved the President feels over any coolness of mine. My husband and myself have opposite natures. I felt strangely disposed to tell you. Serpents have crossed our pathways. I shall expect to see you tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Say nothing about receiving a letter from me. All this is between ourselves. Please burn this note.
Mary's critics failed to take note of the good work she did in Washington's hospitals, distributing fruit and encouragement to the Union wounded. They ignored her compassion towards Washington's black contrabands. In fact, most chose to disregard Mary's many appealing qualities. In truth, there was only one man who ever mattered to Mary, and that was Lincoln.
The president has gone to the front, partly to get rid of the throng that is pressing upon him. There's no doubt he is much worn down.
Lincoln had been invited by General Grant to visit the front lines near Petersburg, Virginia, to witness what all hoped would be the final days of the war. Grant's armies had spent almost 10 months besieging the city from its outskirts. Its fall was now only a matter of days away. Grant had offered Lincoln his own horse, Cincinnati, for the stay in Virginia, and so the president headed out by horseback to visit the front lines.
Passing through the field of battle, the ground about us was strewn with dead and wounded men, Federal and Confederate. Mr. Lincoln looked worn and haggard. He remarked that he had seen enough of the horrors of war, that he hoped that this was the beginning of the end, and that there would be no more bloodshed.
On the following day, after sleeping the night on the water, Lincoln and Mary were invited by General and Mrs. Grant to review the troops of General Edward O. Ord. The commander had brought along his own wife for the occasion.
Mrs. Lincoln objected strenuously to the presence of other ladies at the review that day, and thought that Mrs. Ord had been too prominent in it. That the troops were led to think that she was the wife of the president, who had distinguished her with too much attention.
Mrs. Lincoln repeatedly attacked her husband in the presence of officers because of Mrs. Ord. He bore it with an expression of pain and sadness that cut one to the heart, till she turned on him like a tigress. And then he walked away, hiding that noble, ugly face, that we might not catch the full expression of its misery.
Lincoln awoke Monday morning to news that Petersburg had fallen. Federal wagon trains bearing supplies for the starving inhabitants had already entered the city. After Grant's victory at Petersburg, the fall of Richmond came quickly. On April 4th, Admiral Porter requested the president enter the fallen city. Soon after, Lincoln headed upriver aboard the River Queen.
At first, the president did not want to go. He had no wish to see the spectacle of the Confederacy's humiliation. Admiral Porter thought that the president ought to be in Richmond as soon as possible, that it would be helpful in the reorganization of the government.
The Confederate capital now lay in ruins.
The rebel Congress had passed a law ordering government and other public property to be burned. Flames broke out in various parts of the city. 700 buildings, comprising the entire business portion of Richmond, all burned within a brief space of a day.
The city Lincoln entered was little more than a rubble-strewn shell. What met Lincoln's eyes was not only a city destroyed, but the ruins of the Confederate dream.
The Jefferson Davis home was a large house of gray stucco with a garden at the back. And there was an old Negro house servant in charge. He told me that Mrs. Davis had ordered him to have the house in good condition for the Yankees.
It was a supreme moment. The home of the fleeing President of the Confederacy, now occupied by the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. What he said remains fixed in my memory. I wonder if I could get a drink of water. There was no triumph in his gesture or attitude. All he wanted was a rest and a drink of water.
Enemies. Never again must we repeat that word. I call upon the band to play Dixie. It has always been a favorite of mine, and since we have captured it, we have a perfect right to enjoy it.
On taking his seat, the band at once struck up with Dixie, that sweet, inspiring air. At 11 o'clock, the last goodbye was spoken. The lights were taken down. The River Queen rounded out into the water. We were on our way back to Washington.
An hour later, as midnight struck and the River Queen paddled through the darkness, Lincoln began his last week alive.
Teachers inspire dreams, shape lives, and give us hope for the future. Yet too often, their contributions go unnoticed. There are over 2 million teachers in America, but not even the best get the recognition they deserve. That's why State Farm started the Good Neighbor Award for teachers. To tell them, we appreciate what you're doing for our children.
Serious times demand serious men.
Hard work is the reward for hard work. Tenacity, gumption, discipline.
Sometimes you've got to stop and smell the pizza.
What if you could choose any car in the world, and price was no object? Your heart's desire, just for the asking. A USA Today reader poll answered that question. Lincoln Town Car. The Ferrari came in second. Lincoln, what a luxury car should be.
Oh, Jeff, not feeling good, hon. When Jeffrey catches a cold, we see the pediatrician.
I love my pediatrician. He's my dad.
He recommends Dimetap Elixir.
Doctors have recommended the Dimetap brand over 200 million times. It relieves sneezing, nasal congestion, runny noses.
And Jeffrey really likes the great taste.
Doctors recommend Dimetap for their families and yours.
We have a live-in doctor. He recommends Dimetap Elixir.
If
If you're enjoying this personal and intimate profile of Lincoln, you can own the complete unedited Lincoln story and make it part of your permanent home video collection. Call now to receive your first video, The Making of a President, with a special price of $9.99. You can collect all 4 videos or keep only the ones you want. The complete edition contains 45 additional minutes of Lincoln's personal story not seen in this broadcast. You'll enjoy this tribute to America's most heroic president and share it with your family for years to come. So call now.
Come on, Ma, give it a rest.
I'm doing homework like you should be.
I thought the whole reason to get out of school is so you'll never have to do homework again.
I could look at it that way, but then I'd be stuck in the same job all my life doing the same thing. It's not what I want.
So what do you want?
Something better.
It's as simple as ABC. Never stop learning.
They risk being caught, captured, killed, in a war you never hear about. Peter Jennings joins America's daring drug agents on their undercover missions into the jungles. If you think America has a strategy to win, think again. The Cocaine War, Lost in Bolivia, Monday at 8, 7 Central.
On Sunday, April 9th, a child's doll came to be forever known as the Silent Witness. Left behind by the little girl who lived here, it was in the room where General Lee finally surrendered to Grant at the McLean home in Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Robert Lincoln, on the porch with his fellow soldiers, was unable to see or hear the immense dignity of Lee's surrender. He was unable to hear Grant's acceptance.
What General Lee's feelings were, I do not know. It was impossible to say whether he felt inwardly glad that the end had finally come or felt sad over the result and was too manly to show it.
Edwin Stanton was first to tell Lincoln about the war's end. Impulsively, Lincoln threw his arms around his Secretary of War as one observer saw what he called Stanton's iron mask fall away.
Washington has been in a state of frenzy since the taking of Richmond. The 10th of April was proclaimed a legal holiday, a day of thanksgiving throughout the nation. Mrs. Lincoln told me that her husband was to address the crowd that next evening from the White House window and asked me whether I would like to listen with her to his speech.
Lincoln's last speech, delivered from this upstairs window, was not a poetic speech at all, but practical, having to do with Lincoln's plans for the reconstruction of the nation. The audience, expecting a victory rally, was strangely quiet and confused. Below Lincoln, in the crowd, John Wilkes Booth stood listening to Lincoln's speech about the future, about a united country without slavery.
That means nigger citizenship. Now, by God, I'll put him through.
Nowadays, dreams are regarded as foolish and are seldom told. But I had one the other night which has haunted me ever since. I heard subdued sobs as if a number of people were weeping. I left my bed and wandered downstairs. I went from room to room until I arrived at the east room, which I entered. There before me was a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards. "Who is dead in the White House?" I demanded of one of the soldiers. "The president," was his answer. "He was killed by an assassin."
After nearly a week of rain, the morning of April 14th was beautiful and bright. The war was over. It had lasted so long, this war between America and itself. More than 624,000 men had perished in it, Union and Confederate. Now, no more boys would have to die, north or south. No more wasted blood. On this last morning of Lincoln's life, no one could miss noticing the difference about him. Lincoln just felt good again. 21-year-old Robert had returned from Appomattox, and Lincoln was eager to hear from his son about the great day of surrender itself.
His son, Captain Robert, came into the room with a portrait of General Lee in his hand. The president took the picture, laid it on a table before him, scanned the face thoughtfully, and said, "It is a good face. It is the face of a noble, brave man. I'm glad that the war is over at last."
Lincoln had planned for General and Mrs. Grant to accompany him and Mary to Ford's Theater that night. But at the insistence of Mrs. Grant, who said she would go nowhere with the First Lady after Mary's rude outburst in Virginia, Grant canceled. Curiously, 13 other people proceeded to turn Lincoln down. Ex-Congressman William Howard of Detroit said he was leaving Washington that day. Governor and Mrs. Wallace, just in from Idaho Territory, pleaded weariness. George Ashmun of Massachusetts, Illinois Governor Richard Oglesby, and former Governor Richard Yates all said they had made other plans, as did Lincoln's friend Isham Haney. Ellen Stanton convinced her husband to say no. Even Stanton's best qualified man, Thomas T. Eckert, turned the president down. Noah Brooks had a cold. Robert Lincoln wanted nothing more than to go to sleep. And twice Lincoln tried to twist the arm of Speaker of the House, Schuyler Colfax.
I went over to see our president. He asked me to come again in the evening, as he was going to the theater that night, and desired me to accompany him. I told him that I had engagements for the whole evening, and it would be impossible.
"Very well. I shall take Major Rathbone. Stanton insists upon having someone to protect me." At the meeting of the cabinet today, the president remarked that last night he had the dream again. It was always the same. It related to water. He seemed to be in some singular, indescribable vessel, moving with great rapidity. "I am in a boat, and I drift. And I drift. Gentlemen, something extraordinary is going to happen, and very soon."
In the afternoon, Lincoln invited Mary to join him for a carriage ride.
I asked him if anyone should accompany us. He immediately replied, "No, I prefer to ride by ourselves today." During the drive, he was so gay that I said to him laughingly, "My dear husband, you almost startled me by your great cheerfulness." He replied, "And well I may feel so, Mary. I consider this day the war has come to a close." Then he added, we must both be more cheerful in the future. Between the war and the loss of our darling Willie, we have both been very miserable.
He spoke of his old Springfield home, recollections of his early days, the law office, courtroom, the green bag for his briefs and law papers. His adventures when riding the circuit came thronging back to him. The tension under which he had for so long been kept was removed, and he was like a boy out of school.
At the National Hotel, John Wilkes Booth's day began at the stroke of midnight as he lay wide awake in room 228. The time had come for him to do something decisive.
April 14th, dearest Mother. I know you expect a letter from me, and am sure you will hardly forgive me. But indeed, I have nothing to write about. Everything is dull.
Booth learned in the daily paper of the president's plan to attend Ford's Theater that evening. 4 of Booth's fellow conspirators now agreed to participate in a new plan. Louis Payne, the Florida strongman, was instructed to murder Secretary of State William Seward in his bed. Beady-eyed alcoholic George Atzerodt was ordered to assassinate Vice President Andrew Johnson. Davy Harold, the pretty boy with the mind of an 11-year-old, was to assist in their escape from Washington. Booth himself would kill the president.
I almost begged him to remain in the executive mansion that night and not to go to the theater. But he would not disappoint Mrs. Lincoln and others who were to be present. Then I urged that he allow me to stay on duty and accompany him, but he would not hear of this either.
No, Crooks, you have had a long, hard day's work already and must go home to sleep and rest. I cannot afford to have you get tired out and exhausted.
It was then that he neglected for the first and only time to say good night to me. Instead, he turned with his kind, grave face and said, "Goodbye, Crook."
The comedy, Our American Cousin, had already begun to play to a packed house when the Lincoln party arrived from the cold and foggy night. Attending with the Lincolns were Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. As the group entered the theater, the play halted, the orchestra struck up with Hail to the Chief, and the entire audience rose and cheered. The presidential party then entered the special state box, and the play resumed. Just a little before 10 p.m., with the play still early in Act 3, Mary put her arms around Lincoln.
What will Miss Harris think of my hanging on to you so?
She won't think anything about it.
Those were the last words that Lincoln ever spoke.
A little after 10 o'clock, Booth walked into my bar and called for some whiskey. I gave him the whiskey. I put the bottle on the counter, and then he called for some water. Put the money on the counter and went right off.
Booth had been in and out of the theater throughout the evening.
He came to me and asked what time it was. I told him to step into the lobby and he could see. He stepped out and walked in again and then went up the stairway to the dress circle.
Unbeknownst to Lincoln, his personal messenger, Charles Forbes, had vacated the anteroom of the presidential box and taken a seat in the audience where he could see the play. A guard assigned to stand outside the Lincoln box had also abandoned his post, leaving the way clear for Booth to move up toward the door.
Unlike many other luxury cars, Lincoln Continental comes with standard dual airbags. So while some say the older you get, the smarter you get, we prefer to say the smarter you get, the older you get. Lincoln Continental, what a luxury car should be.
Doctor. Is it right for me?
Habitrol.
It's a nicotine patch.
Habitrol.
For information, call 1-800-685-2000.
You know, Habitrol.
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 Habitrol Nicotine Transdermal System. Available by prescription only.
Thank you, Doctor.
ABC is proud to make this first-of-its-kind television offer. Now you can own a beautiful photograph of one of the most beloved portraits of Abraham Lincoln. Hand-printed by master craftsmen at the Time Life Photo Lab, it captures all the detail in this turn-of-the-century glass negative from the famed Meserve collection. Now a piece of history can be yours to frame and treasure for just $29.95 plus shipping and handling. Own a part of our national heritage. Dial 1-800-CALL-ABC.
Drixoral is. Sudafed isn't. Drixoral is. Contac isn't. 12-hour-long prescription-strong Drixoral is the one cold medicine pharmacists have recommended most for 10 years. Take it from your pharmacist. Take Drixoral.
Car accidents can happen anytime, and they happen that fast. Trouble is, if you drive after drinking, you can't react that fast. I've handled enough claims to know that designated drivers save lives. They drive and don't drink. Accidents happen, but drinking and driving, that's an accident waiting to happen. Be a good neighbor. Be a designated driver.
One network will tell you her story.
Joey loved me.
Another will tell you his story.
I wasn't cheating on my wife.
Only ABC gives you the whole story. Drew Barrymore is Amy Fisher. 1 week from tonight.
Lincoln will continue in a moment.
Wednesday.
I bet you could pick me up like a feather.
Kevin's the life of the party.
Sure. One of those rare 180-pound feathers.
The Wonder Years. Then Doogie acquires a roommate with a view.
I'm a model. I undress in front of strangers all the time.
It's a very happy new year on an all-new Doogie Howser, Wednesday.
The Spirit of Arkansas.
Jerry Townsend and his band love good old country music, but no need to come to his club in North Little Rock if you want to drink alcohol. You won't find it here. Jerry and all of his band members used to be drunks.
Basically, what we've got is a bunch of washed-out alcoholics here. We love music, so it's a real close thing to my heart for people to understand that you can enjoy life without being drunk, and it caused me a ton of problems.
Jerry hasn't taken a drink in at least 15 years. He and his band got tired of playing to tipsy crowds, so 6 months ago, Jerry opened Straight Country. Now this third-generation alcoholic helps others celebrate sobriety.
And we do what we love, but we just don't need the crutch anymore, you know.
Channel 7 salutes the spirit of Arkansas and Jerry Townsend.
More Arkansans get their news from Channel 7 News than any other source.
I long ago made up my mind that if anybody wants to kill me, he will do it. If I wore a shirt of mail and kept myself surrounded by a bodyguard, it would be all the same. There are 1,000 ways of getting at a man if it is desired that he should be killed.
As Booth entered the presidential box, Lincoln had just spied General Burnside in the audience below. and was leaning forward to get a better look at one of the many generals he had been forced to fire. At this moment, Clara Harris turned around and saw the assassin.
Major Rathbone arose and asked the intruder his business. He rushed past the major without making a reply, placing his pistol close to the president's head, actually in contact with it. Booth fired.
I sprang toward him and seized him. He wrested himself from the grasp and made a violent thrust at my breast with a large knife. And as he went over the stage, I cried out with a loud voice, "Stop that man!"
When I heard the shot fired, I turned, looked up at the president's box, heard the man exclaim, "Sic semper tyrannis," saw him jump from the box, seized the flag on the staff, and dropped to the stage. He slipped, but got upon his feet in a moment, brandished a large knife, saying, "The South shall be free."
I heard the sound of something falling out on the stage, followed by sounds of jumps crossing the floor. There suddenly appeared through the entrance a wild man with a dagger in his hand. His hair appeared to be standing on end. His eyes were protruding from their sockets.
And then before anyone could stop him, the assassin was gone. No one saw him slash at the orchestra leader or hop through the rear door at the back of the theater or clatter down the alley into the Washington night.
The audience seemed to be spellbound. There was a deathly silence. I looked up at the president's box and saw him with his head leaning on his breast. Someone said, "Booth," and the cry was taken up louder, and still louder, "Booth, Booth, Booth."
I struck boldly. I could never repent it. Our country owed all her troubles to him, and God simply made me the instrument of his punishment.
At the same moment that Booth shot the president, co-conspirator Louis Payne arrived at the home of William Seward and forced his way upstairs. The sharp blade of Payne's knife was cold, Seward said later, as it cut through his face. "I am mad, I am mad," screamed the giant assassin as he slashed his way out of the house and disappeared into the night. Seward lay still, eyes closed. Those attending him listened for a heartbeat. Seward opened his eyes and said, "I am not dead. Send for a surgeon. Send for the police. Close the house." At Ford's Theater, the decision was made to move the president. His body was carried outside onto 10th Street.
At about 10 o'clock, I heard a commotion in front of the house. I raised the window. When the bearers of the body had brought him nearly across the street, one of the leaders asked, "Where can we take him?" As there was no response from any other house, I cried out, "Bring him in here."
And so, Lincoln's body was brought into a rooming house, upstairs to a small bedroom on the second floor, which contained a wooden four-poster bed.
The giant sufferer lay extended diagonally across the bed, which was not long enough for him. He had been stripped of all his clothes. His large arms, which were occasionally exposed, were of a size which one would scarce have expected from his spare appearance. The surgeons and members of the cabinet were as many as there should have been in the room, but there were many more. About once an hour, Mrs. Lincoln would repair to the bedside of her dying husband, and with lamentation and tears remain until overcome by emotion.
Oh, my God. Have I given my husband to die?
Once during the night when Lincoln's breathing worsened, Mary let out a piercing cry and fainted dead away.
Take that woman out and do not let her in again.
Now into the room came the heavy, sweet smell of lilacs, which were blooming just outside the open window. 1,000 and some nights he had laid down his head in the grand style of the White House. It seemed fitting, though, that his final rest came on a humble, too-small spool bed of a rooming house, just like any other neighbor.
The first indication that the dreaded end had come was at 22 minutes past 7, when the Surgeon General gently crossed the pulseless hands of Lincoln across the motionless breast and rose to his feet.
He is gone. He is dead.
For 4 or 5 minutes, there was not the slightest noise or movement in that awful presence. We all stood transfixed in our positions, speechless, around the dead body of that great and good man.
Mr. Stanton raised his head, the tears streaming down his face. A more agonized expression I never saw on a human countenance.
Now, he belongs to the ages.
At 7:30 in the morning, the tolling of the bells announced to the lamenting people that the president had ceased to breathe. Instantly, flags were raised at half-mast all over the city.
The terrible news flew over the wires, stunning the country. Everywhere, people gathered together. In Bloomington, Illinois, a throng of citizens turned out to show their rage and sorrow in front of the courthouse, where Lincoln had tried so many cases. In New York City, dazed brokers poured out of the stock exchange to stand stupefied in the streets.
At the White House, all was silent and sad. Mrs. Wells was with Mrs. Lincoln and came to meet me in the library. As we were descending the stairs, Tad, who was looking from the window at the foot, turned and, seeing us, cried aloud in his tears, "Oh, Mr. Wells, who killed my father?"
I bathed Miss Lincoln's head with cold water and soothed the terrible tornado as best I could. I shall never forget the scene. The wails of a broken heart, the unearthly shrieks, the terrible convulsions of grief. While being dressed, Tad looked up at his nurse and said, "Pa is dead." I can hardly believe that I'll never see him again. I must learn to take care of myself now. He looked thoughtful a moment, then added, "Yes, Pa is dead, and I'm only Tad Lincoln now, little Tad like other little boys. I'm not a president's son now."
It is impossible to describe the scenes. The tolling of bells, music, military and civic displays, draped flags, black, covering every public building and private house.
The men of Lincoln's government were determined that the country's farewell to its fallen chief would be an event never before equaled. The Washington ceremony was the first of 11 to be held in cities along the path home to Illinois. The sweeping route by which Lincoln had come east 4 years before would be taken again in reverse. 12 different railroad lines would do the honors. Now little Willie's coffin was put aboard the funeral car. 2 Lincolns were going home.
Last year, over 1.5 million cars ended up just like this one. The thing is, the thieves who stole those cars robbed everybody who pays car insurance premiums. That's why State Farm works with car makers to make new cars harder to steal, and why we work with the police to recover cars that are stolen. Because when a thief steals any car, he steals from all of us.
Now there's a chicken vegetable soup that will inspire you to cozy up in front of a crackling fire and indulge. It's Campbell's Best. Introducing Campbell's Home Cooking Chicken Vegetable Soup. Our plumpest cuts of chicken, hearty amounts of pasta, and our finest vegetables. Simmering in a stock that begs to be savored. New Campbell's Home Cooking Chicken Vegetable. It doesn't get any better than Campbell's Best.
These are the best weeks to buy at Sears. Save $130 on this 18 cubic foot Kenmore refrigerator, now only $599.99. Or get ice and water through the door on this huge 25 cubic foot model, now just $999.99. Save $250. Both are 30% more energy efficient than models made just 3 years ago. And this large capacity Kenmore washer and matching dryer are at their lowest price ever. Save $50 on the pair. But hurry, Sears' best weeks to buy end soon.
How many times have you depended on NyQuil to get you through all those colds, all those nights? Now the makers of NyQuil present the most complete non-drowsy cold medicine you can get. Introducing DayQuil Liquid Caps, the amazing liquid-filled capsules that have concentrated medicine to relieve your coughing, chest congestion, stuffy head, and fever with nothing to make you drowsy. Introducing Vicks DayQuil Liquid Caps. Non-drowsy relief beyond belief.
I'm amazed.
It's come to my attention that our competitors at Mercury have a new minivan. Our sources say it's different from any other minivan, including ours. Sliding rear seat, standard anti-lock brakes, drives like a car. Who would want a minivan that drives like a car? Certainly not anyone who works for me.
Mercury Villager. If it was just another minivan, it wouldn't be a Mercury. All this and the quality of a Mercury.
Want to know more about talking to your children about AIDS and AIDS prevention? Send for a free guide filled with valuable information prepared by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. Call 1-800-342-AIDS.
Next, Michelle Pfeiffer, Matthew Modine, and Alec Baldwin.
Oh, this blows my mind.
The mob offed her husband.
Oh, Angela.
To get it on with her.
I want a divorce! Go ahead.
Married to the Mob next.
The death of a president may not be without its use in reminding us that we, too, must die. Death is the same with the high as with the low. But we are not so much aroused by the fall of many undistinguished as by that of one well-known name. By the latter, we are forced to muse and ponder.
"300 dignitaries would accompany the train. Along the way, 1 million people would see Lincoln's face, many for the first time. all for the final time. 30 million would mourn.
There were no truer mourners when all were sad than the poor colored people who crowded the streets, joined the procession, and exhibited their woe, bewailing the loss of him whom they regarded as benefactor and father.
In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Lincoln's body was brought to the House of Representatives. Outside, the thunder rolled ominously over the city. Lightning lit the skies, and the rain fell in a deluge. But nothing could lessen the crowds determined to say goodbye. Along the tracks to Philadelphia, whole towns knelt. As the chimes of Trinity Church rang out, Lincoln was brought into New York City.
The procession had reached New York on the 24th. The whole city was draped in mourning. On the day of the procession, its great thoroughfare, Broadway, was absolutely full, from the Battery to Central Park.
Lincoln's casket was placed in City Hall, where tens of thousands of mourners would pay their respects. There, a New York photographer broke the official rules and took a picture.
To Brigadier General Townsend, I see by the New York papers this evening that a photograph of the corpse was allowed to be taken yesterday in New York. I cannot sufficiently express my surprise and disapproval. Go to the photographer, seize and destroy the plates and any pictures or engravings that may have been made.
On the trip north, guns were fired in the town of Sing Sing. And every West Point cadet crossed the Hudson to silently pass through the funeral car. On the morning of the grand procession in New York State's capital, Lincoln's assassin was finally caught. The hunt had begun 12 days earlier, under the direction of the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton.
The murderer of our late beloved President Lincoln is still at large. $50,000 reward will be paid by this department for his apprehension. $25,000 for David E. Herold. All persons harboring or secreting said persons will be treated as accomplice in the murder.
John Wilkes Booth had escaped Washington on horseback over the Navy Yard Bridge. Ever since the night of the assassination, he had been hiding out in Maryland, recording his rambling thoughts in a diary.
I passed all pickets. Rode 60 miles that night with the bone of my leg tearing the flesh at every jump. I have been hunted like a dog through swamps and woods. Wet, cold, and starving with every man's hand against me. I am in despair.
Finally, trapped in a tobacco barn by a swarm of federal officers and army men, Booth's flight was over.
The hay in the rear of the barn was ignited by Mr. Conger, and the barn fired. Sergeant Boston Corbett, Company L, 16th New York Cavalry, shot the assassin Booth, wounding him in the neck. They carried him from there to the porch of Mr. Garrett's house and laid him on an old straw bed. He repeated 2 or 3 times, "Kill me, kill me."
2.5 hours after his capture, on the porch of this farmhouse, John Wilkes Booth died. 8 of Booth's accused accomplices were arrested. 4 were sentenced to die. On the morning of July 7th, exactly 12 weeks after Booth's fatal shot, the four climbed the 13 steps of the scaffold, were tied up like umbrellas to prevent flailing, and then were fitted with hanging hood and noose.
Mary Surratt, Louis Payne, Davy Herold, George Atzerodt. I want you to die quick.
Those were the last words of the executioner. At his signal, soldiers below the platform knocked away two supporting posts. The front part of the hinged platform swung down, and the doomed quartet dropped in unison.
The train continued on to Illinois, reaching Chicago on the 1st of May. Here, every man had personally known Mr. Lincoln. Here he had tried his causes. Here he had made his speeches to juries.
It was almost over, this huge funeral, the likes of which the world had never known. It had been raining the night before the train approached its destination, but now the sun shined purely, lighting the ribbons of people streaming toward Springfield, lighting the signs along the track. Home, they said, bear him tenderly home.
On Tuesday, the 2nd of May, the funeral train reached Springfield.
Suddenly, everything in Springfield seemed sacred. There was hardly a building where Lincoln hadn't been, nor a street where he hadn't walked. Here was the train station he had used so many times. Here was his law office, now draped in black. Upon departing for Washington, Lincoln had urged Billy Herndon to leave the sign up with both their names on it.
Give our clients to understand that the election of a president makes no change in the firm of Lincoln and Herndon. If I live, I'm coming back sometime, and then we'll go right on practicing law as if nothing had ever happened.
He had touched so many people over the years. He had ridden so many miles over the Illinois prairie. He had battled so hard against the evils of slavery.
Though I now sink out of view and shall be forgotten, I believe I have made some marks which will tell for civil liberty long after I'm gone.
The Lincoln House in Springfield was the focus of attention now. Everyone went there, drawn as if Lincoln was still alive, wanting to stand on the same floor where he had stood, touch the same walls, have his picture taken out front beside the tree Lincoln had planted a decade ago. Be somehow comforted by the only house he had ever called his own.
It is not merely for today, but for all time to come, that we should perpetuate for our children's children this great and free government which we have enjoyed all our lives. I beg you to remember this.
In the procession to the cemetery, Lincoln's horse, Old Bob, would follow directly behind the hearse. Lincoln's cousin, John Hanks, was there, his only relative from back home who turned up. Sarah Bush Lincoln was just too weak to make the trip from her Goose Nest prairie cabin.
I did not want Abe to run for president, did not want him elected, was afraid somehow or other, felt it in my heart that something would happen to him. Oh, my boy Abe, they killed him. I know they would. I know they would. I've been waiting for it.
much in the West had ever been so large. It led to a limestone receiving tomb carved into a steep hillside, on top of which a majestic monument would rise. All the singing and music gave the day a semblance of festivity. But nothing could hide the overpowering feeling of loss.
It is hard to realize that he is gone, that we shall no more see his commanding form, hear his kind voice, or touch his honest hand with its well-remembered earnestness. It is hard to take in the dreadful thought that the head of the nation has perished by the hand of an assassin. But so it is.
He was home. The man who embodied the spirit of what Americans could be at their noblest, their best. Lincoln's large coffin and Willie's small one were gently placed side by side inside the heavy iron gates and strewn with spring flowers in the gardens of their Springfield neighbors. Robert Lincoln had attended the first and now the final of his father's funerals. Mary remained in Washington, confining herself to her bedroom, unable to attend any of them.
No such sorrow was ever visited upon a people or family as when we were bereaved of my darling husband. Every day causes me to feel more crushed and broken-hearted. Time does not soften my grief, nor can I ever be reconciled to my loss until the grave closes and I am reunited with him.
We will be remembered in spite of ourselves. 25 years ago, I was a hired laborer, mauling rails, at work on a flatboat, just like any poor man's son. I claim not to have controlled events, but confess plainly that events have controlled me. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations.
Take a tip from Santa and give the Dirt Devil hand vac. Help someone you love clean up this Christmas.
Teach your children well.
Hey, buddy. You gonna do it alone this time?
Did slowly go by. Don't you ever ask them
When the
why.
time comes for a man to choose his own brand of underwear, more men choose Fruit of the Loom than any other brand. The reason is simple. Comfort, because that's what real men want. Fruit of the Loom, clothes for the best of your life.
I've been dating another man.
It's your brother.
Better make it Malox. Malox Plus tablets relieve indigestion, heartburn, and gas. Tums can't do all that.
Oh, here. I know my brother better than you.
Better make it Malox.
Fast Cure, Easy Cure. The Gyne-Lotrimin cure for recurrent yeast infections introduces convenient disposable applicators. A new one each day. 7 disposable plastic applicators, only from Gyne-Lotrimin. Fast Cure, Easy Cure.
Introducing the 32-valve, 280 horsepower Lincoln Mark 8. And the only interior that can keep up with it. Drive the new Lincoln Mark 8, but drive everything else first. The new Lincoln Mark 8. What a luxury car should be.
Ben and Connie Studebaker look at things differently since they became parents. I'm Roger Cool. I'm their State Farm agent. Having a family brought a lot of changes in their lives, so we thought it was a good idea to sit down and have a family insurance checkup. We started by adding to their life insurance protection. Then we went over all their family insurance to help make sure their coverage was up to date. After all, you never know what could happen.
And like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Wednesday, Tim's gonna get the new year off to a flying start.
Come inside before you hurt yourself.
Don't let go of that rope. Drop in on Home Improvement. Yeah. Well, I know I love my little girl.
And I love you, Daddy.
What's Hayden doing with a stand-in daughter? Never too old for affection. Bring out the year with a crazy coach after Home Improvement. Wednesday.
Tonight's presentation brought to you by Lincoln Mercury and the complete line of 1993 Lincoln and Mercury automobiles. And State Farm Insurance. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
This is Charles Gibson.
And Nancy Snyderman. This week, how fruits and vegetables can help you have a healthy baby.
Plus Hoffa's Danny DeVito and Broadway's Tommy Tune. This week on Good Morning America.
Stay tuned for Married to the Mob, the ABC Sunday night movie. Next.
Tuesday, it's True Confessions.
You spend the whole night in your room. I'm not stupid. You think I'd do it with you 20 feet away? You could do it real quiet without us knowing about it. Really? You can't.
Roseanne. Then Jackie does Arsenio.
Catch the show last night?
We had a little tiny problem with the show. We hated it.
Not enough me, huh?
Jackie Thomas after Roseanne, Tuesday.
From New Hampshire to Georgia, New York to Houston, with first-hand reporting on the Clinton bus tour, Channel 7 News gives you the Arkansas point of view. From the campaign announcement to the acceptance speech and the victory celebration, the Channel 7 News team takes you where the others can't and goes where the rest won't, leading the way to the Clinton inauguration with the first reports from Washington. This new year, Channel 7 News invites you to celebrate the spirit of Arkansas in Washington.
In 5 years, over 22,000 Arkansans have called the 7 on Your Side volunteers.
She had arthritis so bad she couldn't open cans, and she just wanted a can opener. And I thought, well, we can get her a can opener.
Sometimes it's the very little, simplest problems that people have that we're able to quickly solve.
Here is the backbone of
7 on your side.
In 5 years, 7 on Your Side has helped thousands of Arkansans just like you. Call 324-HELP. This is KATV, Little Rock, Pine Bluff.
Pfeiffer, Matthew Modine, and Alec Baldwin. Oh, this blows my mind. The mob off her husband. Oh, Angela. To get it on with her.
Tony's been trying to doom me ever since.
All right, where is he? I know he's here. Now she's given up the good life. We're still your family. To get her own life back.
I want a divorce!
And if you're moving, I'm blowing it off.
Go ahead. Married to the mob. And now, the ABC Sunday night movie presentation of Married to the Mob.
A girl went back to Napoli because she missed the scenery, the native dances and the charming songs. But wait a minute, something's wrong. Mambo Italiano, Mambo Italiano, go, go, go. You mixed up Siciliano, you calibrated with the mambo like a crazy with a